Well, welcome everybody. It is Michele Price here at Startup Grind Houston. And I'm really excited today because, I made a promise and a commitment to you all a couple of years ago that we were going to have really different kind of conversations. And more than just different kind of conversations, we were going to bring you people to the mic that you don't usually get an opportunity to talk to or listen to. And so that is definitely what we at the top, I always like to share a little bit about how Startup Grind is dedicated to fostering growth of early stage companies from bootstrap beginnings through Series A round. And I also love sharing the fact that our three values are really, really simple. We like to make friends, not just connections. We like to give first, and we also like to help others before we help ourselves. And so that is something that you're going to find no matter where you go in the world, in the 600 chapters that we have in about 100, 30, 40 countries now. That's what you're going to find with Startup Grind. Now, let me tell you why I'm bringing you the person we're going to talk to today. By the way, I realize, and this happens to all of us, I realized I actually forgot to ask Scott, because Scott and I met each other through LinkedIn. I forgot to ask him how to pronounce his last name, so I'm going to let him do it. But I'm bringing you Scott because we met, over a year ago on LinkedIn, and I noticed he was doing something really different. He was asking people really good questions, and you guys know me. I love questions because questions help you actually make better decisions. And so that's what you're going to kind of hear us talk about today. We're going to talk about things from a place of a really different lens and perspective. So, Scott, I find that most people do a much better job of introducing themselves than me trying to memorize a great introduction. So please tell everybody who you are.
Thank you, Michele. My name is Scott Frassard, and I don't know what I need to share, but I'll give a few facts about myself because there's just so much there. I currently live in Houston, Texas, and professionally I'm a psychometrician, which is a geeky job with numbers and building exams. But professionally, my career has spanned the medical field, the education field, and now corporate training / certification. And 4 years ago, I learned that I am autistic, was formally identified as autistic, and it changed my world in the most profound and wonderful of ways, and has changed the trajectory of who I perceive myself to be, where I'm going, and what makes me happy. So happy to answer other questions about who I am if you'd like.
Well, what brought us together was you were doing a really great job of using polls on LinkedIn to ask a lot of questions. I think, gosh, gee, it felt like you had a new question every day, though I know you didn't have a new question every day. And one of the things that I noticed when you finally shared with us that you were writing a book from all the cool things that you learned from those sets of questions is I'm reading in the beginning of the book, and I'm sitting here and I'm going, okay, what am I going to learn about Scott that I didn't know from the beginning? And so when I was reading about your journey of being going through the evaluation process to discover, or to be diagnosed as autistic, I was reading where you talked about taking like the Aspie quiz and how you thought your wife knew you better than yourself. And here's what stood out to me. You said, I needed to have a name for what I why I felt so different from the rest of the world. And I sat there and I said, boy, do I understand that. Why I felt so different from the rest of the world. And when we think about startup founders or even funders who they're looking to create solutions that nobody's created yet. And it led me to ask a bunch of questions, which is, why do we not make it easier for people to understand who they are, especially if they have one or multiple forms of neurodivergence? Because I think those are the ones who are actually coming up with the innovative solutions. And isn't that supposed to be what startups are about, creating innovative solutions?
Absolutely. It's interesting. You're right. I've felt different from everybody else my entire life, and I didn't know why. And to me, that was really important to know why. Being late identified, I was 48 at the time, and some people that I knew were like, "Why bother? You've had a successful life. You've got a good life. Why bother? And why risk taking on this label, if you will, that's only going to harm you in the future?" But you know what? It actually, not knowing was more problematic than anything else. And by having that identity and learning that about myself, that opened me up to, as I went and started learning more about it, because I came from the medical field where it is viewed as a disorder, something wrong with you. And so here I am thinking, okay, now there's something wrong with me, though I know what it is now. And then as I started to really learn about and listen to the autistic community, my perceptions of autism completely changed, and I had a brand new view of what it meant to be autistic and that experience, and it answered so many things about my life. And again, it just opened up so many new directions. And I'll be honest, I've always been a person that has great ideas. Or let me rephrase that, because I don't want to sound too full of myself. I'm always somebody who comes up with these ideas, and most of them never come to fruition. That's true even today. But it's one of those things that I can actually lean into it more now, because I realize why that is, and why I don't just fall in line with the social norms. Well, because I'm not socially norm, and that's okay. Check out this idea. So it's almost like permission to go off in a totally different direction and discover new things that haven't been discovered before.
Loving that. I'm loving that, because one of the things that I tend to talk about quite a bit, because it is literally my North Star statement, and it's how I run. It's the premise that I run my business off of, and we brought it over into our Startup Grind chapter, is that I want to see 75% deliberately silenced voices at all decision-making tables everywhere. Because frankly, we don't have enough of the right people at decision-making tables right now. It's such a narrow view of humanity at those tables, and that's why we have the problems that we do. So when you were coming up with this stuff, not this stuff, what's the better word for me to ask? When you were asking all these questions and using the poll feature on LinkedIn, had you already thought about writing the book before that? Or did you use the process of asking questions and then the thoughts of the book came later?
The latter. So early on, as I was learning about the community and starting to learn about this divide that exists between the autistic community and the autism community that encompasses largely people who are not autistic but speak on behalf and direct, here's how you should think. That really, when I saw advocates, and there's nothing wrong with this, but when I saw advocates saying, here's what you need to know about us, here's what you need to believe about us, I put on my org development hat and I was thinking, okay, how many people are really going to listen to what I have to say if they don't trust me yet? How do you build trust? You build trust by taking an interest in what other people think. To your point about the values, give first. Um, so I decided that, okay, I would like to shift to be more of a self advocate. And in order to do that and have people listen to me, I need to listen to people first. I got to ask questions. And some of it was me learning about myself, but then it naturally transitioned to me wanting to really generate a dialogue and understand why do people feel that a pathologized view of autism is the right way to look at it. So I really was interested in what people had to say. And at the same time, by understanding why people feel the same way, it gave me information or insights into how do I get them to see things a different way. I can't do that unless I know where they start from. And somewhere in between the two, there is a commonality. And I typically use the context of applied behavior analysis, ABA. People go into that field wanting to help people with whatever. Their method of doing that, what they are taught how to do that, is different than what I believe, but I believe also in helping people. So we have a commonality. We can capitalize on that and explore our values, beliefs, and assumptions about our approach and find a different pathway that is more amenable to the people that are receiving the help, if that makes sense.
It does make sense. And one of the things that I've noticed, though, is the conversation around autism and autistic has changed greatly over time. And there's been so many misunderstandings and ill crafted definitions. And you said something that I think is really behind some of that, and that is advocates are having the conversation for people with autism instead of allowing the people with autism to talk.
Yes. And there is a great book, influential book by Alicia Broderick that talked about the autism industrial complex. And it was really enlightening to me. And having come from the medical field, it makes a lot of sense in that. And when you look at some of the organizations out there that are purported to help autistic people, when you start digging under those layers of assumptions and what they publicly project, there's a profit motive. And it's one of those things. Their industry wouldn't exist without us. So I kind of feel exploited, even though I'm not a participant in that. So I want to understand why that is and help them understand our perspective at the same time.
Yeah, I know that a colleague of mine who's autistic says to me quite a bit, and I'm going to remember exactly how they say it. But what I do remember is they say that those of us who are autistic don't have a problem. Who has a problem are neurotypicals that choose to try to put us in boxes or other
Mhm.
us or treat us as if there's something wrong with us. And
Yes.
that's one of the things that I'm noticing is finally starting to surface to the top of conversations. Uh, I'm curious to ask you, what are you seeing, especially since you were pretty intentional about asking really great questions and using polls? What are you noticing is shifting in the conversation around autism?
So, great question. And granted, this response is going to be from a very narrow point of view. I typically use LinkedIn and Facebook as my primary uh, media. And one thing that I have absolutely noticed is before I started, again, very few questions were being asked. It was all unilateral communication. Let me tell you how you need to think about autism. And that's where I decided, like I said, I want to be different. And if you've ever noticed, rarely do I ever assert my perspective. Sometimes I'll make a post, but I don't intermingle it with the 99% of my posts about the questions. Rarely do I ever give my perspective because I want to foster that dialogue in a judgment free zone so we can come together. And I'll be honest, since then, I have seen a lot more people do that. Um, and it's interesting. The people that I am connected with on LinkedIn, when I started seeing them ask questions, it made me proud that I potentially I had an impact and help people change how they advocate and shift toward more a question oriented or a discovery dialogue perspective than a assertional discussion perspective.
Yeah, I also think that that has, what's the word, that has actually, kind of like water that's flowed from what you've done into other areas of questions and polls and
Mm-hmm.
conversations. Because I know one of the things that uh, I found really interesting and beneficial was the way you actually constructed your questions and to the level that you communicated. So, the communication strategist in me was like all excited because I'm like, here's somebody who actually knows how to give people boundaries for how to participate in the conversation.
Thank
Um,
you.
because it would be really easy. You and I've both watched it happen too many times for people to just come in and throw spaghetti at the wall instead of really genuinely participate in
Yes.
bringing their thoughts to the surface. Tell us about that. How did you how did you come up with, and what I'll do is I'll put a screenshot of maybe say two of your question polls in the event description so people can refer to it and see it. How did you come up with how you set those parameters for people around your questions?
It was largely trial and error, but given my one of my research approaches is survey based research, so I do a lot of that, and so that was just a natural. Hey, I can ask questions and using the poll feature uh, because polls will get more attention than not. And so I purposefully use polls to draw attention. And given the limitation of four responses, that kind of helped me frame how am I going to look at this. And one of the things that I did, uh, maybe two things that I did. Number one, I would pick one topic instead of trying to just go macro and kind of ask something really broadly. I focused on a particular area, and then I ask a broad question related to that. And a lot of times in my questions, instead of just limiting, because we have a limit of 4 responses, I limiting it to 4 different or even overlapping categorical responses about how people may think, when I know that there can be an infinite number of ways, and so why limit it to 4? Um, I decided, you know what, let's take a more deliberate, more comparison approach to get people purposefully to reflect on their values, beliefs, and assumptions, and why they think that way. And that, what that does for us is shifts us out of the let me just respond, and shifts us into let me think about this for a minute so that I can respond. And in change management, it's well known that asking a question in and of itself is an intervention. If the question isn't asked, people aren't going to think about it. But if you ask the question, people will think about it. And if you ask it in a very strategic way, people will think more deeply about it than a surface level. And one of the things that I got frequently was, well, you should have asked this. Okay, that is, and I acknowledge, yes, that is a question that can be asked, but I'm asking the question here. And even in that, when somebody will say, well, that's not really the question to ask, um, that's demonstrating that they're actually thinking about this and reflecting and being critical in their reflection, which is what I want. Get people thinking beyond just repeating what society says we should think.
If everybody who listened to our fireside chat went out and bought your book, which I think if you hold it up, it's going to show up better than in my background. I think, no, yeah, it won't show up because I'm using backgrounds. So, yes, there we go. So, a reflective question to ponder. What would you say to them in hopes that they would gain from reading?
I'm thinking about the question and my response carefully, um, critically, really. 2 things, really. I want them to set aside, here's what I believe about autism, or maybe I don't even know anything really about it. But if I do, let me set that aside for a second and see something through another person's lens. And the questions, and there's 6 chapters of questions that are loosely grouped together in like broad categories. The questions are really meant to, just like they did online, spur thoughts. And the other part of it is, with the questions themselves, is take this book, talk to somebody else, open it up to page 153, and question number 770. How can organizations and interviewers change their interview process to be neurodiversity affirming? Ask people these things. And if more people are asking these questions to many others, somebody somewhere is going to reflect on that question. Maybe they ask a hiring manager or a talent recruiter and go, you know what? I never thought about that. How do we do that? And we start to propagate change. Like your example with the throwing a pebble in the lake and you get the ripples. That ripple effect is going to happen. And the more people are asking questions and asking questions of more people, somewhere somebody is going to have an aha moment and create change. That's really what I hope happens.
Well, I know one of the things that I enjoyed about reading it is because I'm already a question asker. So
Yes.
I'm going to say when I take a book and I'm looking through it, I'm literally going, okay, I already asked really good questions. What is something that I can gain from Scott's body of work? And I thought, oh, I don't have to come up with a whole bunch of questions. I literally can just go to a question he's already proven online is effective and start pep yeah, peppering's probably not a good word. I'll use it anyway. Start peppering conversations with it.
Yes.
And I'd even go so far as to say, you know what? Probably one of the biggest benefits of utilizing, not just reading, but utilizing, putting your book into action is we all already know and hear on a daily basis take an action that takes you toward the direction you want to go. Well,
Yes.
you're trying to effect change. The best way you could do that is actually pull one of your questions out of the book, whether it's on a daily basis or once a week, and bring it to the people you work with.
Yes. Yes. Um, oh, I had a thought and it just left my mind. I hate when that happens. Um, but yeah, just again, just asking questions. Not only in order to ask a question, you've got to think about it too, but it's going to trigger somebody else. And for me, I love the idea of using it as a resource, and that's part of why I wrote this. But also, I don't profess to know all the questions, or definitely not all the answers, but there is an art to asking questions. There's a science to it as well, and the more you do it, the better at it you get. And if you're reading it and asking other people, you're going to get better at asking questions and asking. I like asking provocative questions, things that'll really challenge our assumptions, challenge the status quo, and make us really think about, oh, why do we do that? And do it in a non-judgmental way so that we do have even if it's just an internal dialogue, but we do start a dialogue. And one of the things that was very important to me, both when I'm advocating through questions, but I wanted to really emphasize in this book, and why I put chapter 8 in there, which is all perspectives are valid. Each individual person's perspective is their reality, it is their truth. We have to honor that in order to have dialogue. And so, by going into asking questions with that mindset of somebody may be polar opposite than me in their thinking, but to them, that is their reality. It is valid, a valid perspective. I may not hold it, but they do. I need to honor that.
Yeah, because I know one of the things I wrote myself notes on my notebook as I was reading it is I felt like it was important to write this down. You have a question in there that I absolutely love, and that is, why can't it be different?
Yes. Yes.
So often, and I think what prefaced that was how people were saying, well, that's just how it is. Says who?
Yeah. And if you boil it down to its bare basics, unless it violates something, a law of physics, something that physically cannot happen, it can change.
Yeah, and since I'm all about, and that's supposed to be the premise of startups, is creating solutions, it
Mm-hmm.
sure seems to me like this would be a book that all startup founders and funders would want to have on their desk with their dictionary and their thesaurus.
Thank you for that, number one. But number two is, I do believe that there are transferable lessons in here for others to think about things, that startup perspective, going, why does it have to be this way? Why can't it be different? And so I do think there are some transferable lessons in here, and nothing else than let's start asking why. And one of the things that I love when I do any sort of change management is, let's don't look at why something won't work. Let's look at how we can make it work.
Yes. Yes, yes, yes. That's a perfect place for us to leave that with everyone who's come to listen to you today, is they can take that question while they're waiting for their copy of their book to arrive and start using that as a framework on a daily basis and just see what happens. See what surfaces from just asking that new question.
And the way I look at it is, by asking the question, if we question everything that we do, we're assured one of two outcomes. Either we find out that we were doing it correctly and now we have evidence to support it, or we found a better way to do it. Both of them are positive outcomes.
They are. They are. Is there anything that you would like to leave everyone with today other than that great question that you just delivered them before we sign off?
I just want to say thank you, everyone, for listening to this fireside chat. Thank you for considering buying my book, and absolutely thank you if you do. I hope you enjoy it. I know you will. Tell your friends, tell your family, and I can't begin to say how much I appreciate your help spreading the word.
You got it, Scott. We appreciate you.
Thank you.
All right, everybody. We'll come back to you next month. Who knows with what other new way of thinking, a new way of asking questions, or a new solution that we all might want to work with. This is Michele Price here at Startup Grind Houston, and we appreciate you joining us.